Okay, so we got Johnny Fisher taking on Alen Babic tomorrow night at the Copper Box Arena in London. I've already done at least one video about this, and my view on who I think is going to win hasn't changed. And judging by the poll I did on my YouTube community page earlier on today, it seems as though most boxing fans are on the same page that I'm on. Last I checked, it was something like 70% of people who voted on that poll are picking Johnny Fisher by knockout. That's not 70% picking him to win, that's 70% picking him to win by knockout, because there's also a certain percentage picking him to win on points. There's a tiny percentage picking Babic to win, and pretty much all of them are picking him by knockout if he were to pull it off. There's several things that concern me about Alen Babic going into this fight. When I say concern me, I'm talking about if you're looking at it from the perspective of his chances of victory. So Babic spoke openly in several interviews about his punch resistance having deteriorated following his loss to Lucas Rosansky. He said he was getting hurt all the time in sparring, for example, and it was worrying him. I've spoken about this many times before. When a fighter gets knocked out, not that Alen Babic got knocked out cold or anything, but he suffered several knockdowns and took some heavy shots, there can be neurological effects as well as psychological effects that linger following a knockout or stoppage defeat, sometimes for several months. And that can result in, let's say, temporary deterioration in punch resistance and sometimes permanent deterioration in punch resistance, depending on how much punishment you took in the fight and also the way that you're created. Because some people, for whatever reason, are more robust than others. They can naturally recover better from neurological damage. Why? We don't know, but it is a thing. In any event, as I say, Babic admitted to having this loss in punch resistance, which he noticed in sparring following the stoppage defeat to Rosansky. He said he was worried about it, but when he fought Steve Robinson, he said that restored his faith in his chin. Now that right there is very disturbing, folks, because in order to have your faith in your chin restored, you'd need to actually get hit with some good shots, some powerful shots, bang on the chin and take him with no problem. That simply did not happen in the Steve Robinson fight. It didn't. Babic seems to want to convince himself that it did happen, but it didn't. That fight's up on YouTube, folks. You show me any moment in that fight where Steve Robinson gets through with anything that even vaguely resembles a serious punch. When I say serious punch, I'm talking about the type of punch that Johnny Fisher delivers on his opponents. Because I'm not sold on Johnny Fisher at all. I've gone on record several times to say that I think he's a gimmick. Be that as it may, he's a gimmick who can punch. He's young, he's got loads of energy, he's physically strong, he's not shy or let his hands go. There is absolutely nothing in the Robinson fight to suggest that Babic has got his punch resistance back to an extent necessary to be able to absorb the kind of shots that Johnny Fisher can deliver. Now, to be clear, I'm not saying that Babic hasn't got his punch resistance back. I'm saying we just can't tell from the Robinson fight. The point I'm making is the fact that Babic thinks the Robinson fight proves that he does have his punch resistance back indicates to me that he is delusional and he's trying to convince himself consciously of something which, on a deeper level, he may not actually believe. And then we look at the press conference. Now, Babic is a character. He's always been a character. I find him quite entertaining. But to me, his behavior towards Johnny Fisher smacks of desperation. He was trying to be as belligerent as possible when Johnny Fisher was being very respectful. And so what I take from that is you got a guy in Babic who's a veteran fighter now. He hasn't had a lot of fights, but in terms of age and in terms of punishment taken, he's a veteran fighter who, in my view, deep down is worried. But he's a gambler. I mean, you see the way he fights, you can tell he's a gambler, a risk taker. And so, of course, it's a risk taking this fight. But deep down, I think he's concerned, hence being so belligerent at the press conference. I think he did that because he wants to try and get under Johnny Fisher's skin. I think he feels like he needs some type of psychological advantage in order to win the fight, in order to give himself a better chance of winning the fight. Babic was also talking about his amateur pedigree, about the fact that when he was boxing as an amateur, he had something like 100 amateur fights. Johnny Fisher was just a little kid. But this sounds eerily similar to the stuff that he was saying in the run-up to the Rosansky fight, because Rosansky, if memory serves me right, either had no amateur fights at all or very few. And this was a fact that Alen Babic was leaning on heavily in the run-up to their fight. And look how that ended up for him. He got knocked out by a guy who was basically a 40-year-old novice in the first round. And it wasn't some anomaly either, because in the 3 or 4 fights preceding the Rosansky loss, Babic was getting hurt by nondescript opposition. And I speculated at the time in several videos that Babic might be damaged goods because of all those brutal sparring sessions he's had over the years with Dillian Whyte and all these other big heavyweights who he's sparred. He's not exactly difficult to hit, is he? You know, tough sparring is necessary, but it needs to be closely monitored and restricted to a certain extent, especially for heavyweights. You know, these are not lightweights we're talking about here. These are not welterweights. These are heavyweights. If you're having all-out slugfest week in, week out in the gym and sparring as a heavyweight, more than likely it's going to have a detrimental effect on you before long. And I suspect it's had a detrimental effect on Dillian Whyte. I think that's partly the reason why his punch resistance has deteriorated so badly over the past few years. And as I say, same goes for the fighter he manages in Alen Babic. Now, with all that being said, I'm not saying that Alen Babic has no chance. It's heavyweight boxing, and he is going in against a novice. Of course he's got a chance. I think his best chance will be if he can survive the early onslaught and establish some type of rhythm on the front foot, where he's got Johnny Fisher's attacks timed and blocked. He's managed to figure him out a bit, anticipate where the punches are coming from, and then impose himself on Fisher. Maybe come in behind the jab, work the body a bit, and try and drag Johnny Fisher into deep waters and drown him. That's a conceivable scenario. I just think that a more probable scenario is that Johnny Fisher either takes him out inside 4 rounds, perhaps with the assistance of a premature matchroom stoppage. We'll see. If not, if he can't get Babic out of there inside 4, from what I've seen of Johnny Fisher, I think he does have enough to win the fight on the back foot on the scorecards. You know, Babic isn't a particularly sophisticated pressure fighter. He's very basic. Based on what I saw in his last fight against Steve Robinson, he has tightened things up a little bit. There was still the odd wild swing, but Pascal Collins has got him shortening his hooks and uppercuts, and he'll need to maintain that against Johnny Fisher, because I think he's going to have to walk through quite a lot of punishment at the best of times. And so if you can take those shots and at least have them partially blocked on your gloves, it's better than taking them flush. And when you're swinging wild haymakers, it leaves you open to taking flush shots. Babic has shown some head movement in the past, but he's going to need a lot more of it than normal, I think, against Johnny Fisher in order to get close to him. And when he does get close to him, he's got to get the shots off fast. When you're in there, one of these young guys who's got the height and reach on you, who's younger than you, who's more energetic than you, who's fresher than you, you have to make your opportunities count. You have to. The way I see it, Johnny Fisher can afford to make more mistakes than Babic can. And that's why I'm picking Johnny Fisher. And I suspect that Johnny Fisher will try to keep this fight long, at least for a few rounds. I know he does tend to start fast, but it depends on the opponent. I suspect against Babic, you'll want to have a look at him in the first couple rounds. Stay behind the jab, gauge his speed, gauge his timing, see what shots are available at long range, if any. So yeah, that's how I see it. Let me know how you guys see it in the comment section below. Are you sick and tired of the mainstream mindset? Does the dogmatic conformity and pathological ignorance have you tearing your hair out in frustration? Then don't be alone. Come and join our brotherhood on Patreon. We stand as a beacon of reason against an army of insanity. You'll gain access to my weekly topical podcast, where we take more deep dives than Jacques Cousteau on an endless variety of subjects. There's also videos, interviews, live Q&As, as well as a vast back catalogue of previous episodes, including my popular Confessions of a Nightclub Bouncer series. You can listen via the Patreon app or download in high-quality MP3. Connect with myself and hundreds of other members in our Element chat group. There's no contract, no commitment, you can cancel at any time, and it's cheaper than a Mickey D's McMuffin. Just head to my Patreon page via the link below this video and select the tier called the Brotherhood of Reason. I'll see you over there.